welcome to Unexplained Arkansas. This is Amber.
And this is Lisa, tickling Amber.
Oh, goody. We're sharing a mic today. We are. We are actually in the same spot, sharing the same mic. So
sharing zero sugar Sunkist.
Yes, we are drinking some zero sugar Sunkist, which I didn't know they made, which is really good. I'm always looking for zero sugar options. Mm-hmm. So it's been a long week. We've had Halloween. We've got election stuff coming up. Oh, gosh, it is that time where, everything goes 90 miles an hour, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. And I have voted.
Oh, I have not voted. I'm going to try to do that tomorrow.
You got to go vote.
I am.
Good for you.
Yes. Okay, so we have a Patreon, I think, today.
Yes, we have a new Patreon, and her name is Candace S. So thank you so much, Candace.
Thank you, Candace,
for joining us and enjoy all the scary heifers, extra content.
Yes.
Love you.
And I really enjoyed Scary Heifers this week. We did it on the original Halloween, 1978, and that was a lot of fun.
Yes. My favorite movie.
Yes. And I have the next one, and you'll have to guess what we're doing.
Like right now?
I guess you can. What do you think we're doing?
Ooh, I know, because you told me kind of.
Okay.
What Lies Beneath.
We are, yes. We are doing What Lies Beneath by Robert Zemeckis.
And we watched that together at the Hornybrook Mansion.
We did. We also watched it in the year 2000.
In the year 2000.
Yes. When we were teenagers, we watched that together at the theater. And I have the movie, and I love it. It's one of my favorite ones. It was between that and Skeleton Key, but I might do Skeleton Key later. So, but I want to do What Lies Beneath for our next Scary Heifers. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so today, since this is election week, I wanted to do something political without getting political. Boo. So we are going to talk about the Arkansas state capitol. So we know that the capitol is a place where laws are made, where our representatives are, working, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and where everybody takes their prom pictures and senior pictures.
Oh, that's true. Yes, where everybody takes their... Did we take our prom pictures there?
No, we
didn't. No,
we didn't. But that is very much a thing now.
Oh yeah.
So we have seniors next year.
Yeah, that's true. We do. We took our pictures. I remember we were at the Capitol.
We all went to
restaurant.
Dillon.
Oh,
we did go to we did go to. It was called Ashley's. Remember?
Yes, that's right. Ashley's at the Capitol.
Ashley's at the Capitol
Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And I have pictures from the restaurant.
Yeah, but we all back when we were in school, we all went to George Dillon's and we lined up outside of his, studio for hours. And it was actually an event. I feel like the pictures was the event.
Oh yeah, I actually have several pictures of people in line for George Dillon's to get their pictures made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went way off base there, sorry.
No, that's okay. It really is the place everybody gets their prom pictures made. You're right about that.
It's those lovely doors.
Well, the Arkansas State Capitol has a history behind it that I guess I didn't realize. I guess maybe I've heard it here or there, but I didn't realize that so much had transpired on that spot. Now, the first time I had thought, okay, I'm going to do an episode on the Capitol, I was actually in Mount Holly Cemetery, which is over there, on the other side of the freeway, and it kind of overlooks the Capitol. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, oh gosh, wouldn't it be, fun to do something on the history of that, and if there's anything supernatural. Mm-hmm. So we both kind of, discussed that and looked some things up, and sure enough, there are several really cool stories attached to the state capitol building. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's some new stuff that'll probably be coming with some excavations that they'll have to be doing with new construction, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of back up. A couple weeks ago, I did an episode on the old State House, and we've actually, since that episode, met people that work there and that have told us some other strange stories that have gone on there.
Evelyn.
Yeah, Evelyn, that's right. What did Evelyn say?
Okay, so she said, oh gosh, I think she said a couple of things, but wasn't there like maybe someone like you feel someone or something.
Yeah, well, they totally agree that there is something
Like
pernicious
activity.
going on in the old state house, which we talked about several of those stories, but she said that there were other things that we didn't cover, so that might merit another episode sometime in the future. Well,
or and she did mention coming in to do
paranormal investigation.
Yeah, so that's right. Cool.
Yeah, so that was our first state capitol, the old state house, and now it's basically a museum. There was a time period that it was a medical lab facility. There was a time period where...
Go back and listen to that because that was good and interesting.
Yeah, that was really interesting to me too. Until I did the research, I didn't know that either. So every time I do one of these, I find out like some really good, behind the scenes kind of Arkansas history that I didn't get like in Arkansas history class as a teenager. Some of these stories are really cool. Okay, so the Arkansas State Capitol is a monumental neoclassical structure, and it serves as the seat of the state government, housing the legislature and the offices of 6 of Arkansas' 7 constitutional officers. Not only is it home to lawmakers, but it also houses memorials, and it's been featured in several major movies, which I didn't know that either. So beyond all that, this building does have a little bit of a secret, one that was only revealed a couple of years ago by Fox 16. Yeah, they did this big story on maybe a paranormal thing behind its history that people really haven't talked about before. So the current building is the second capitol built in Little Rock, as I just said, and it replaced the old State House, which is now the Old State House Museum. The Old State House Museum had been erected in 1830 something between Markham Street. Do you like that? 1830 something. Well, it was in the 1830s. It was a process. Everything back then was a process.
Yeah, I think it took.
Yeah. But it was between Markham Street and the banks of the Arkansas River, right there in downtown Little Rock. But in 1899, so this is how far back we're going today, then Governor Daniel Webster Jones lent his support to a bill suggesting a new capitol be built on the site where the state penitentiary was, as he described that land to be too valuable, quote unquote, to be used as a prison. Which brings us to the big reveal for a lot of Arkansans, that our state capitol that we use today is sitting on top of a former state prison, a penitentiary, a place where a lot of really, terrible things happened, honestly, because the prison system was ghastly back then, and we'll talk about some of that. So let's just talk for a minute about the history of the Arkansas prison system. So when Arkansas became part of the United States through the Louisiana, this is,
Oh, sorry.
The Louisiana Purchase. I'm going to treat you like a student. Through the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, Arkansas Post continued to be the center of government for the region.
Initially, we weren't a state yet.
We weren't. But we were part of the United States through the Louisiana Purchase.
We were owned.
There was a lot of...
Like Puerto Rico.
Yes. So Arkansas continued to be the center of government. Arkansas Post, continued to be the center of government for the region. Initially, it was part of the Louisiana Purchase and the Louisiana Territory, as I said. Then it became what was known as Missouri Territory. And then in 1819, it became the capital of Arkansas Territory. So the first jail, so by then they needed a jail, apparently. So the first jail...
Before they even had a state, we
had a jail.
That's
okay.
Right.
So the first jail was built under American jurisdiction at Arkansas Post, and it was erected in 1813, and was the only public building in the settlement for many years. And to me, that merits maybe a dig into that later, because that's very interesting.
A dig?
A dig. Yes.
That'll be funny later.
Yes. I don't know a whole lot about Arkansas Post except for just the basics, so that's something I would really like to get into. But eventually everything moved from Arkansas Post, as we know, and it moved to Little Rock, which was a central location. Arkansas Post was then demoted to just a county seat, and eventually a second jail was built in 1835 to serve as the county jail. And I'm not sure if that means in the county of Pulaski or what, but it says the second jail was then built in 1835. So in 1835, there was only 2 jails in Arkansas, pretty much.
Interesting.
So the Encyclopedia of Arkansas outlines how traditional criminal punishment often entailed fines, whipping, branding, the stocks, or execution. I had to actually look up what the stocks were.
That's like where they put you
in the head and then the hands. So I have that little picture right there of somebody in the stocks because I had to look at that. Yet a contrasting rehabilitation-focused philosophy was gaining ground in major cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia. So there were advocates for better treatment of people that were imprisoned. Advocates claimed this approach was more humane and it was more of an advantage to society to rehabilitate prisoners. However, critics cautioned that the ambiguous concept of rehabilitation could create harsher interventions or lengthen the sentences or lengthen sentences for clearly defined penalties. Yes. So while there was this debate going on about prison reform all over the country, this really wasn't a priority for Arkansas at the time. It just wasn't. So the state's third prison warden, James McVicker, determinedly implemented a rehabilitative approach despite budgetary constraints and prisoner unrest that damaged the facilities. So there was a whole lot going on. However, the challenges ultimately proved insurmountable, leading McVicker to resign his position and join the California Gold Rush, as so many did.
He's like, bye.
Yeah. So it was around this time that Arkansas was becoming a state, and they were calling for a central prison location. And so in 1835, Albert Pike, that's a familiar name, advocated for prison.
It's got an Albert Pike Road, right?
Yeah, we did. He advocated for prison in the Arkansas Advocate and recognized that Arkansas had a strong need for such a facility. So then creating a state prison became a top priority for that early Arkansas government, and they approved the legislation to do that as soon as 1838. So then in 1838, that's when James Conway pushed for the legislation establishing the state penitentiary. So the following year, 92.41 forested acres were purchased roughly 1 mile west of Little Rock, and construction commenced at the site. However, the first prisoner was not incarcerated there until 1842, and the prison was not completed until the year after that.
Okay, so there was a prisoner before it was completed.
Well, yeah, they had other, jails and prisons. They just wanted one in a central location, so that's why they chose the one, in Little Rock, like where the state capital is.
Yeah, but it sounds like they put a prisoner there and then they finished it.
Yeah, they did. He was there. I guess it's like flying.
Did they make him finish it?
I don't know. I guess it's like flying the airplane while you're in the air. I don't know.
That's weird.
Yeah. So the first prison was designed to hold up to 300 inmates. Yeah. And the prison featured fortified guard towers at each corner. While the state had acquired the land and funded the construction, it did not intend to actually operate the prison itself. So they
didn't?
Exactly. Okay. So the state paid for it, but they didn't want to operate it. So instead, the state contracted the prison to private parties who put the inmates to work in construction projects and other forms of labor.
Okay. So
yes.
Just basically use them for free labor.
Yes. They ended up having what's called a convict lease system, which was really profitable for the investors, that were part of the prison, and the state actually as well. But it did lead, of course, to abuse and neglect. Of course it did.
Yeah.
So I did find this from this Arkansas Quarterly from the 50s that I found was very telling. And this is quote unquote, it says, a change of keepers on August 5th, 1846 brought about an uprising, and the main building was destroyed in an attempt by the convicts to break out. A desperate convict named Morgan organized the break for the purpose of freeing all the prisoners. The plan was to rush the gate and overcome the guards by using their weapons, and in this way he would try to free his fellow workers. A dozen of the more daring convicts were chosen for this big rush. Several of the men fought with the cell guards while Morgan and his group proceeded toward the gate. He was armed with a knife in one hand and a pistol in the other. He shot and cut anything that got in his path. His death was brought about by a volunteer prisoner who shot him to death while assigned to defend the doors. Some of the prisoners, by help and good conduct during the break, were given pardons by Governor Thomas Estiger. So that was one of the interesting things that happened. And of course, there were several situations that were pretty hairy. So the convict lease system, of course, made them work, during their punishment and do different kinds of labor for absolutely no pay. So despite the inherent injustice of the system, it did persist. It persisted. And it was a fundamental part of Arkansas's penal system into the 20th century. So that's how long this kind of thing went on. But during this period, there were frequent prisoner unrest problems created. A lot of it was created by the prison administrators themselves. Then,
no way.
Yeah. And then it was that big uprising in 1846 that damaged so much of the structure. Yeah, but the prisoners were the ones that repaired it after. Yep,
of course they did.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, they had to fix what they messed up.
Yeah. So there was also something interesting. I saw that in 1861 they started letting them out. They gave them a time allowance for good behavior. So, after that point, 1861, the good behavior did count as time served.
Okay.
So, yeah. I don't think that makes up for all the terrible things that they had to do before, but, So then it gets really interesting because you know what happens in the 1860s, right? Mm-hmm. The Civil War breaks out. And so the U.S. Union Army eventually, in 1863, seized the penitentiary and operated it as a federal civil and military prison, which I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
Or maybe I read it and then it just went in one ear and out the other. But yeah, it was actually a federal prison that was used during that time.
Wow.
And this was actually where the famed boy soldier, quote unquote, David O'Dodd was. And, the David O'Dodd story is pretty famous if you took Arkansas history, but if you didn't, you probably don't know it. So here it is. So here you go. So here you go. So in 1863, as the Union Army occupied the city, the Dodd family was a Little Rock family that evacuated south to Camden. And so this was behind Confederate lines. Then on December 24th, 1863, the Dodd father, so David's father, sent him to Little Rock, and he was underage. He was 17, on business, quote unquote, believing he would be safe from the army. Then Confederate General James F. Fagan issued Dodd a pass, and in what may have been a jest, he expected a full report upon the boy's return. So he set off then from Camden to Little Rock, and like I said, he was carrying, he was carrying a pass. He carried his birth certificate to prove he was underage, and he rode a mule all the way to Little Rock. Yes, from Camden. And he attended holiday parties.
That sounds painful.
Yes. But when he got there, he got to party, and he met the quote-unquote ardent little rebel Mary Dodge. Now, I'm not really sure who she is. She sounds like somebody we need to read about, too. But Union officers were quartered in the Dodge home, where Dodd was invited to visit. So on December 29th, Dodd left Little Rock, not expecting to return. After staying the night with his uncle, he traveled through the woods and found himself back behind Union lines. Near a place called 10 Mile House, he was stopped and asked for his identification. Dodd showed a notebook containing not only his birth certificate, but also there was some Morse code detailing Union troops' strength in Little Rock. He was arrested on the spot, court-martialed as a spy, and sentenced to hang. Yeah, so sad. So, according to legend, Union General Steele offered to release Dodd if he named his informant, but Dodd refused, saying, "I can give my life for my country, but I cannot betray a friend." Mm-hmm. So this is what they think he said, but however, Dodd's sister claimed he likely acted alone, inspired only by the hope of serving his country. So on January 8th, 1864, in a huge spectacle, the 17-year-old boy was hanged at his former school.
Wow.
The agonizing execution lasted over 5 minutes, according to some scholars. And Dodd is buried in Mount Holly Cemetery.
Oh my.
Yeah. I mean, he was fighting for the wrong side. My only thing is he's a kid, and his dad probably, I mean, who knows? Who really knows what really happened there? But I think it's just sad that this kid lost his life.
Yeah.
So after the war, we continued on with some very unhealthy practices in the prison as a state. Mm-hmm. We had pretty much a pay for prisoners program. Yeah.
What does that mean?
Just what you think. So in 1867, after the Civil War ended, the penitentiary was returned to Arkansas control. So it had been under the control of the Union for 3 years, and then, during Reconstruction, given back to Arkansas. So in 1873, the state formally codified the previously informal convict lease system into law. The state appointment leasees received 35 cents per day per prisoner to provide food and clothing, and they were permitted to put the inmates to work, including on new buildings within the penitentiary grounds.
Yeah. So okay.
Yes. So, and again, there was, a lot of mistreatments going on. From that same Arkansas Quarterly, it said, quote unquote here, in the fall of 1875, the person running the prison was actually called out by the Little Rock Evening Star for violating his contract by various mistreatments of the prison inmates, which meant poor food, inadequate clothing, overwork, unmerciful beatings, and even wanton killings. So Ward demanded an investigation. The person that was running the prison and the board of commissioners spent 2 weeks holding hearings. They eventually exonerated Ward from any violation, with the report of the commissioners noting an actual excess of force and punishing violations of the rules and a killing that was inhumane and a matter for the grand jury. The general management of the penitentiary, its police and sanitary conditions are as good as the buildings and grounds will admit of. The buildings were totally unfit for use as a prison. The commissioners had received no response to an advertisement for bids to repair them, though. The reason may have been that the current law permitted only interest payment on the costs of the penitentiary construction until the lease expired. So the report referred to the vicious system that was permitted to keep going of these working convicts outside the walls, but recommended no solution. So basically, the guy really wasn't charged for anything. There was really no solution. So, part of the difficulty at the penitentiary was attributed to the increase of the convicts for the past 10 months. And, so there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, so they knew there was a problem. They knew there was a big problem. Yes, but they didn't know how to fix it. They said, there's a lot of inhumane things going on here. There's buildings that need to be repaired, but nobody wants to repair them. It just seemed like a horrible place to be.
And I'm sure after the Civil War, there was a time of just, money problems, too.
Yes, definitely. So over time, new administrative laws refined the system without meaningfully improving the prisoners' lives, unfortunately. But the 1880s and 1890s kept seeing the state control of the prison and the convicts. So this leasing thing just kept going on and on and on.
Wow.
We're talking railroads, farms, mines, private enterprises. They all, quote unquote, employed inmates from the state penitentiary. Yeah. And there are several cases of, notorious cases of abuse that went on during this time. So at a place called Coal Hill in Johnson County, prisoners endured beatings, long working hours, and inadequate food and clothing. While a critical newspaper article sparked public outcry about this, though, the state government's response tended to address specific abuses at Coal Hill rather than a systemic problem within themselves and the convict police system as a whole. So they're like, hey, it's not our fault. They misused what we, the people that we gave them. So again, there was really...
like pushing the buck.
Yeah, so really there was no solution. So this brings us to 1899. It's just an ugly mess. It's just a bad situation. Lots of killings, lots of beatings,
probably disease.
Lots of disease, you betcha. All that kind of stuff was going on in this place, right? So this brings us to 1899, and the governor then was Daniel Webster Jones, and he pushed a bill suggesting Arkansas state capitol be moved there. He described the spot as being too valuable to be used as a prison. So then, shortly after that, the legislation moved to relocate the penitentiary to a 15-acre site, to a 15-acre site southwest of Little Rock. That facility is commonly known as the Walls, quote unquote, and it opened in 1910. And I would like to do a story on that, on the Walls. So that's what happened to the prison. So, and we can probably talk about what we think might have happened, inside those prison gates. There's really no way we'll ever know. I mean, a lot of it was not documented, and there was a reason that it wasn't documented. So we may never know how many people actually died
on that site.
That site. We may not know. Exactly. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty sad, all of it, really. Yeah. So they got rid of the prison, and they were kind of in the new phase, which was, okay, we need a new capitol built. So
yeah, because the other one would have been, it had all that problem.
It had problems from the get-go. It had foundational problems, the old State House, from day one. And that's always been the problem with that place. Yeah. And
they were outgrowing it. So, it makes sense. But.
It does. So, it was signed into law on February 13th, 1899, that the old site of the state penitentiary would become the new state capitol. So, in March of that year, the Assembly enacted Act 128, which allocated $50,000 to hire an architect and begin the project. The act also stipulated that the total cost of the envisioned capitol should not exceed $1 million, and it made 200 state convicts available to work on the capitol project to save money. Wow, that is not shocking at all. Not at all. Yeah.
Not at all.
No. Additionally, the law created an appointive commission to oversee the construction. So there you go. So construction on this new state capitol was kind of like the old one. It was a very promising start, but it was kind of on one of those pay-as-you-go type situations. Yeah, and those are never good. Yeah, because you think one thing and then another thing happens. And you know how you're supposed to measure twice and cut once? Yeah, I read a blogger say that about the state capitol plans back then, and that's kind of what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was not lined up with,
Yeah, so they couldn't exceed $1 million, and that was hard, So construction on the new state capitol pretty much slowed after they started running into some problems. The project, like I said, was intended to be pay-as-you-go, but the legislature was reluctant to appropriate the funds to actually keep it going. So the capitol remained a controversial undertaking, in part due to the opposition from former Attorney General and the current governor, Jeff Davis. Davis initially justified his stance on grounds of economy and the supposed illegality of building the capitol anywhere but on the grounds of the existing State House. So there was a pocket of legislators that were mad that they were moving the capital from where it was, right? And, I guess in a way that I could understand that.
And obviously from our point of view, we're so glad they did this because obviously it's nice to have
the two buildings.
Yeah, and just have that history preserved.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I guess I get that. But there really wasn't room.
No.
If you think about it, or maybe there was at the time. It's hard to imagine, but they ran out of space. And
I keep thinking about the one guy. I wonder if he's just, sitting there over his eggs and bacon one day going, you know what, I think we should kick those prisoners out and build a capitol there.
Well, I will say, because probably, of course, when they were first planning the city, this penitentiary or whatever was over here.
It was way over there.
But
it was
now,
on the west part.
We've built,
and we're growing, and we don't want to build around a prison.
No, and that's an eyesore, and it's a problem. So, they do, if you notice, I hate to say it, all the prisons are very much away from civilization. And, even now, you look at it like the one in...
Well, you mean highly populated
areas. Because you don't want them to, especially if they get out, or just, and they have, they need a lot of ground, they put the fences up, but what's that one prison?
Cummins?
Yeah, the Cummins is kind of out.
Tucker Max.
It's just kind of out.
People do live there. Nice people do live there.
No,
I'm sure,
and that's not what I mean, but, it needs to be, it's not something that you want to see in your everyday city when you go, look at our city of Little Rock.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be on the brochure for, visitors.
Yeah. It was a political move. I'll give you that. It was a political move, and it was, it was because of growth, I think, that it happened.
And where the state capital sits is prime real estate. Yeah. At the time, it wasn't, but then it changed. 60 years went by.
Yeah.
So much changed for Little Rock. So.
Yeah, but, all in all, when they started the project, I think they had stars in their eyes, and they really didn't think about the costliness of it. They thought they had the free labor of the prisoners, which was very unethical.
And they thought $1 million would be plenty.
Yes, they did. Yes. So basically the project wore on, and there were complaints that shifted, basically, to, it shifted from people around the area to the contractors and the architects, themselves. They were really hacked off. Yes. So in 1905, concerns over alleged construction shortcuts seemed to validate Davis's criticism. That summer, 4 state senators and 2 representatives were indicted for accepting bribes related to capital construction appropriations. Part of the so-called boodle scandal. That's such a fun word.
Caboodle?
It was just a boodle scandal. It was a boodle.
Not a caboodle.
It was a boodle scandal. That's what it was called.
That's funny.
Okay, so the only Senator Festus Butt.
What?
That was his name. Google it.
Wait, what?
It's in my notes. Only Senator Festus Butt. Is that what it's? Google that. Make sure.
Festus Butt.
The name is.
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Festus Butt.
Okay, so Senator Festus Butt was ultimately convicted of taking money from contractor Caldwell and Drake. The scandal tainted public.
Yes,
That's
right. Festus Orestes Butt.
Okay, so his name was Festus Orestes Butt. I'm sorry if this is your great grandfather that we are defiling his name. Oh my God.
He lived for almost 100 years as only a Festus Butt. Oh my God.
Well, now we know why there is no Festus Butt Parkway.
I'm going crazy over Festus Butt. That's offensive.
Okay. adorable name. Little Festus.
What happened to Festus Butt?
Okay, so Mr. Butt was pretty much a butt, and ultimately was... Okay, so if you noticed a break, it's because we spent 15 minutes trying to compose ourselves because the man's name was Festus Onestus Butt. But, I'm sure his mother thought that was a precious name, and we're just going to move past the fact that his name was F.O. Butt. So,
and he lived 100 years.
He did. So the Butts have longevity. The only Senator Festus Butt was ultimately convicted of taking money from contractor Caldwell and Drake. The scandal tainted public and political attitudes toward the project for a long time. And the following summer, there were new allegations of shoddy workmanship, and substandard materials were then leveled against Caldwell and Drake. So by 1907, everything had just ground to a halt, and the uncompleted Capitol was then predicted to be a haven for rats and owls and bats and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So in 1908, the Arkansas governor's race centered on the unfinished state capitol project. Of course it did, because by this time, how much money was in it?
$1 million.
Well over. So voters elected former Capitol Commissioner George Donaghy, who took office in 1909, and he was determined to revive the work. With Donaghy's backing, the Capitol Commissioners dismissed the original architects, Caldwell and Drake, and seized control of the incomplete building. The commissioners then enlisted renowned New York architect Cass Gilbert to restore and complete the Capitol. Gilbert was a good choice. He had just finished the Minnesota Capitol, and he was actually working on that Woolworth building that is in New York City.
Cool.
Yeah, so he was known for timely completion, which was probably the first interview question.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you complete this
yes.
building? Yeah.
Yes. So Gilbert accepted the commission on June 27th, and crews soon began tearing out the defective construction. Oh, that just hurts my brain.
Yeah.
Like, all that was done, and then you have to tear it all out and start over. Gosh. Yeah. So people were really upset about that, right? That all this stuff that had been paid for was then torn out, and things had to be, completely started from scratch in some places. So there were injunctions, lawsuits, all kinds of things like that, right? So that was a deal. Then, in 1910, the inadequate iron and steel work in the Capitol had been replaced, the fireproofing had been improved, and new reinforced concrete floors had been poured. Okay, so by then, all that had happened. Mann's original metal dome design was abandoned in favor of a stone dome closely resembling the one on the Mississippi State Capitol, a feature that had been designed by George Mann, unbeknownst to Gilbert. Plans,
I really like your work.
Yeah. Plans for exterior statuary were also scrapped, saving money while simplifying the building's neoclassical silhouette, which is very nice.
It is very nice.
It is very nice.
And it looks very much like the Capitol in Washington.
Yes. So by December 1910, 11 months later or 10 months later, the building was unfinished, but it was deemed ready for occupation by the governor. So Governor Donaghy and the commission moved in. So by this time, I don't know if I mentioned this, but Donaghy was the governor by this time. So, all right. So on January 8th, 1911, over the protests of the Secretary of State, the first loads of furniture and files were moved from the old State House to the new Capitol. The General Assembly convened there for the first time on January 9th of the next year, and the state's executives soon followed suit. So the state Supreme Court finally moved to their new facility in 1912, so everybody basically was home, right?
Mm-hmm.
After all that work. So how many years did that take? A lot.
It took 16.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of years.
Mm-hmm.
So the Arkansas State Capitol retains that 1915 neoclassical revival design, and it blends Doric, Ionic, Corinthian architectural elements, and I love our Capitol. I think it's gorgeous.
Do you have a few tidbits in there about it?
Yes. It's cross-shaped layout. It has a cross-shaped layout, elongated along the north-south axis, and capped by a prominent dome. And this is pretty typical of American state houses. The limestone-clad building measures 440 feet long and 195 feet wide, with a 213-foot tall gilded lantern cupola. Is that what that's called? Cupola?
I think so.
Yeah, topping the slightly conical dome of softer Indiana limestone.
Yes. So the other limestone for the building came from outside Batesville. And the dome, it has like the paint, like it's painted with 24 karat gold.
Really? Oh, nice. And my question is, where did the money suddenly come from for that?
Maybe some private donors.
Maybe. Okay, so inside the 287,000 square foot interior, however, it became pretty much too small to accommodate the majority of state offices and departments, and so they began constructing all these buildings around the Capitol, and we've all seen that. So you've got the state capitol there in the middle, and then all these buildings around it. So in 1958, the state Supreme Court relocated to the nearby Justice Building, while the Attorney General's office is downtown. So, however, the legislature and 6 of Arkansas's constitutional offices continue to be based in the state capitol. Approximately 350 men and women work in the Capitol's offices year-round, with this number swelling during the Arkansas General Assembly's mandated sessions in January of each odd-numbered year. So that will be next year, too, won't it?
It will.
Yeah. The Capitol building houses a cafeteria, a snack bar, a shoe shine stand, and a hair salon. Yes, that serves legislators, civil servants, and the public. Recent restorations have returned key interior spaces, such as the old Supreme Court chamber, the governor's reception room, the Senate chamber, and rotunda, to their original appearance while preserving their functionality. Though architect Cass Gilbert's plans for the historical murals were never realized, there are 4 murals by Fayetteville artist Paul Herwigen adorned, around the grand staircases leading to the Senate and House chambers. The Capitol's grounds have undergone decades of revisions, but recent projects have restored elements of the original landscape designed by architect Frank Blaisdell, including lighting pylons and ornamental walkways around monuments to Confederate veterans and women. The state capitol building was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1974.
Ooh, little tidbit. So
yes.
The lovely brass doors.
Yes.
That everybody likes to get their pictures in front of.
Yes.
So those cost $10,000, and they were from Tiffany's in New York.
Nice.
Yes.
I just always think about handprints on there all the time. I mean, they need somebody.
So, have you noticed they clean them?
Yeah.
And it's like a special, of course, because they're brass.
Yeah.
It's a special deal.
Y'all, don't touch all around the door. Every time, it seemed like every time I would go, there'd be handprints all over. Mm-hmm. Or in the pictures I see from prom, there's handprints. I'm like, there's handprints behind the door or on the door. Okay, so in August, maybe it's a ghost. Maybe they're ghosts. So in August,
prisoner.
Yeah. So in August 2023, a $3.87 million proposal was approved to construct an underground walkway connecting the Capitol building to the nearby multi-agency complex of buildings. Concurrent with the walkway project, there's planned upgrades to the HVAC system on the north side of the Capitol. Yeah. So what do you know about that new underground walkway?
So all I know, and I had read a little bit about it, so actually this walkway has been wanted by legislators since 2009.
Oh, wow.
And they actually allocated the funds, and for whatever reason, actually Governor Beebe had not released the funds at that time. He felt like it wasn't necessary at that time. So when it was brought up again, Governor Huckabee actually didn't, not Governor Huckabee. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so Governor Sanders, when it was brought up again, she actually was, kind of debating it, but because of the need for the update with the HVAC system, then it made it...
That makes sense.
Yes, and so I think that they hope to be done with it by this new, coming year or whatever. And they don't know yet if it's going to be open to the public. So I don't know, but I would vote no.
I would vote no.
I hope. Well, it depends because it is for use for them to not have to go outside on the grounds between their sessions. But it depends on what's all done.
Yeah, that's true, and that's kind of where I'm going with this because the prisoners that lived on those grounds 100 and whatever years ago, some of them were buried there.
Yes, and there was an article and like a little news thing that I watched, and it had it said that the guy thought that there probably would just be fragments.
Exactly. Yes. So who you're talking about is state historian David Ware, and he also characterized the prison that occupied the site until 1899 as a big old mess. And given the rampant disease, like you said before, and the violence that occurred in such a closed-up, confined space, Ware did speculate there were likely many inmate deaths. And this raises the question of where are their bodies, right? Certainly the prisoners were buried on what today would be the Capitol grounds. While there was an effort to remove some remains, Ware said there could still be some remnants of remains there. And he said, I believe if there are any skeletal remains, they are probably fragmentary. So very, very small. Yeah. So, But still, that is very creepy that where our state capitol is right now, there is fragments of remains that are still there of people that had died during this, horrible prison system that was going on in the state during the late 1800s. It's really actually sad, thinking about how many people were sick and how many people were killed and things like that on that side. Just treated very badly, right? So that is pretty interesting. But it's not the only interesting thing, and it's not the only mystery that surrounds the Capitol. And until I started, researching this story, I had no idea about this one either, right? And that was the death of Ira Gurley. Yes, now that is interesting stuff right there. So on June 17th, and I think it was 1932, yes, a man widely expected to run for Secretary of State was waiting for an elevator on the third floor. And, David Ware also talks about this one, but in an interview with Channel 11, by the way. He says that Gurley stepped onto the elevator, but the operator had not noticed him getting on. As the operator began closing the gate, the elevator started moving upwards, crushing Gurley between the floor of the elevator and the top of the door frame.
Ugh.
Yes.
Can you even imagine?
No. So, I thought, well, that's a pretty interesting story. I wonder if there's more to it. So I started looking, and of course there is. There's been several podcasts about this. There has been a book written, and I listened to the author today, actually. He was on the show Most Notorious. Yeah, Most Notorious podcast. So there's actually a book out there titled A Voice for Ira, and it's by a man named Ross Dale, who is a historian and a former police officer. And, he has a different opinion than what the official opinion was. He says that, now he's a police officer, a former, right? He says police were never called, and it was strictly an in-house investigation.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. So, okay, a little bit about Gurley. He was an up-and-comer in Arkansas. He was kind of like one of those new political superstars, a little younger. He had a wife, 2 daughters. He was a former school teacher. His wife was a teacher. And he had spent some time as an Arkansas principal. So he was in education first. Then he obtained his law degree, and, this is in the 20s, right? He ran for the House of Representatives and served 4 terms. Okay. So he's pretty popular.
Yeah.
So after the 4th term, he was appointed to Commissioner of Arkansas Game and Fish.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So he had served quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
He'd been there for a while. It was at this point, when he was Game and Fish Commissioner, that he announced he was running for the Secretary of State. Yeah. So on the day of the accident, he was at the Capitol on the 3rd floor for a meeting. The 3rd floor, of course, at the time was where the House and Senate chambers, well, still are, where the House and Senate chambers are located. As he was leaving the meeting, he went to the elevator, and the regular elevator attendant was given the day off. Okay. It was somebody new that was there. Witnesses said it was the quote-unquote assistant elevator operator that was operating it that day. So the door opened, and 2 ladies step off, and yeah, they were state workers. The 2 ladies said that the second that they stepped off, the elevator started moving upward with the doors, not the cage, still open. Yeah. So at the same time, Ira was stepping onto the elevator, and then the attendant accidentally pinned him in the doorway with the cage door, and the elevator went up, and he was crushed between the floor of the elevator and the ceiling of the doorway.
That's just so terrible.
Yeah. So his skull was crushed, and so it was one of those cage doors that slid horizontally. So Dale states in his book that the assistant elevator attendant was not really an elevator attendant; he was a janitor there.
So he just kind of got...
I guess he was just doing it that day. Right. And the usual elevator attendant had been given the day off. But that's not what is so interesting. So the ambulance came and got him, and they were initially going to take him to the hospital and try to revive him, but then they realized that he was already dead. Yeah. But that's not the craziest part. The craziest part was when the incident first happened, the elevator attendant actually pulled him into the elevator and went down to the basement and called the Secretary of State at the time, Secretary McDaniel. Yeah, Ed McDaniel. Yes. So this is according to statements, right? And of course, I'm going to say allegedly.
Allegedly.
No charges were ever filed. So this is from the perspective of Ross Dale, who's a historian and former law enforcement, right? Okay. So basically, the attendant, or quote unquote the attendant that day, drug him into the elevator, went all the way to the basement, called McDaniel, who was the current Secretary of State, which is the office that he was running for. Yes. So Secretary McDaniel did the investigation himself. No actual report is available to this day, and there was no coroner's report. Yes. So he signed off on it. Actually, the coroner did sign off on it as an accidental death. Yeah. He was basically told what happened by McDaniel, and he was like, "Ooh, that sounds like a bad accident," and signed it. So Rossdale writes about the possibility of there being something else at play here. And the book itself talks about connections to the mob who used Arkansas as a playground during, that day and age. Yeah. So, of course, this is allegedly. Yeah. This is what he says, not Amber. But
it sounds very conspiratorial.
It does. I'm just saying what's out there, right?
That's interesting.
It's interesting. And, the more I read about it, the more interesting it was. And listening to him speak on the Notorious podcast was pretty cool. So this is the blurb from the book. Okay. In 1932, Ira Gurley was sitting on the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Ira was the father of future Cosmopolitan magazine editor-in-chief Helen Gurley Brown. He had served 4 terms in the Arkansas House of Representatives, elected by his peers in Carroll County. He had announced his intentions to run for Secretary of State and looked to be a strong candidate for the position. While leaving a meeting in the Arkansas State Capitol building, an employee of the current Secretary of State pinned and crushed Ira in the doorway of an elevator, killing him. The Secretary of State, Ed McDonald, sent the elevator operator home and handled the investigation himself. No law enforcement agency was called. This book tries to reconstruct the day, events, and political atmosphere of the times. The reader will see what happened and what should have happened, and then determine for themselves if this was a horrible accident or was there a cover-up inside the state capitol. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, so...
But definitely a horrific death.
Yeah, I mean, it was a horrific death. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to disagree because I haven't read the book. I'm going to order it and I'm going to read it. But I need more evidence before I'm like, ooh, this is really suspicious, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like just a crappy elevator to me and a wild coincidence. Now, should there have been law enforcement involved? Heck yeah. And that's where I see that the problem is, right? Not... Oh my gosh, that was thunder. That was creepy.
Dun, dun, dun.
I'm not necessarily thinking that it was all planned.
Yeah.
My thought is, why didn't they get law enforcement in
Yeah,
there?
why would...
That, to me, is the mess up.
Well, yes, and that's always what makes people think that things were more messy than they were.
Yes.
When you don't do things the right way.
Yes. So. And so that kind of led to some conspiracy because, there's no police report.
And maybe it's just the 1932 of it all. I don't know.
I mean, yes.
I mean, nowadays, you can't imagine that. But I don't know what was protocol. I don't know what... like you said, it'd be interesting to read the book.
Yeah. I think I was shocked when because first I read just a very small blip about it, I think in the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, and then I read an article based on a Channel 11 episode, whatever. But then I was like, wait a minute, I did another Google, and there were all these podcasts about it. I'm like, ooh, they are conspiritualizing this. So there is something. Yeah, it's very interesting. He was the father of Helen Gurley Brown, who wrote the book Sex and the Single Girl, not to be confused with Sex and the City.
Way before.
But she was also the managing editor of Cosmopolitan magazine. Yes, and she was very much a part of that culture of women in the 60s and 70s. Cool. So, yeah. So she was 10, I guess, when her father passed away.
That's so sad.
Yeah, it's so awful, so sad. Yeah. So whatever happened to Ira, it was a tragedy, regardless.
Yes.
The
Capitol.
Yes, but if you do want to investigate more about the death of Ira Gurley, there are plenty of sources out there, so you can decide for yourself. I haven't quite made up my mind yet, so I'm going to order that book, I think. Yeah. All right, so that brings us to our last thing, which is that paranormal investigation that we talked about at the beginning with Fox 16 News and Sweet and Sour Paranormal. That just makes me hungry for sweet and sour chicken, yes. Anything sweet and sour. I love sweet and sour sauce. So they set off to see if they could put all these haunting tales basically on a record, is what Fox 16 said. So they had a clairvoyant with them, Michelle Martindale, and immediately when she entered the Capitol building, she did get an eerie feeling. As she walked past that elevator, something drew her back to it. From that spirit to the next, the hunters knew they'd be in for a spooky night, quote unquote, from Fox News. Yes. So they screamed my name. They screamed Chris's name. Then they said to leave. I'm just saying they know we're here, and that's all I'm telling you, Martindale said. So she heard I guess she heard the ghost. I don't know if it was Gurley or if it was the prisoners. Yeah.
I think there was an actual, they heard it on camera, and I don't...
Did they have video of it?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think it's on, I think I saw a clip of it on YouTube, I guess, but it was to me, yes, it sounds like a girl screaming, but it also could, I feel like it could have been...
Yeah.
That place is huge.
Now, that happened while the photographer was setting up, is the girl screaming, right?
Yes.
So they caught it on... Yeah, they caught it just accidentally.
They did.
Yeah.
And they did catch a lot of, what do you call those, EVPs and such. But I don't know, it almost sounds like maybe even an elevator moving up and down. Like, like a screeching noise.
Yeah. Well, they did use the thermal imaging cameras as well.
Yes.
And they did see, quote unquote, a silhouette of someone, allegedly, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, they used these recording devices. They also used them in the basement, which to me would be the creepiest part of the whole thing, right?
Yes, that would be so cool.
So while one of them was asking the spirit questions, he picked up another voice, and after 5 hours, it was time to pack up and leave. And they got just those few things while they were there.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that's. I mean, because it sounds like it was answering their questions too. So, like we said about the Allen house, like the intelligent type of.
Well, and also, they did that, and I think it was the same team, right? The Sweet and Sour Paranormal that did the old State House too. So I would like to go, if they have all this on their site or whatever. I'd like to
collaborate.
No, well, I don't know.
I think it'd be fun to go on one of their.
I would like to go to the old State House, but there's just something about the state capitol.
Did you see our lights just blink?
Yes, I did. I'm trying not to get freaked out. Yeah.
It's a storm!
Yes.
I love storms.
Yes. Well, there's just something about the state prison system back then that just makes me so sad that I just don't want to do any kind of anything with that area, with that building. Because, I teach about old asylums and poorhouses, and we talk about penitentiaries, and we have to talk and describe how these places really were in the 17, 18, early 1900s, and it's just horrific. And while probably some of those people in the prisons were probably horrible people, there probably were some that were not.
Yeah.
And it just breaks my heart to think that they died in such a manner, or they were forced to work with no pay. I mean, just a lot of garbage went on, in the 1800s that, I'm very thankful that stuff doesn't go on today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and anytime you get, people, there's always that money, greed.
Yeah. They thought it was free labor.
Yeah. I mean, and treating people poorly and, getting away with it. So it is sad. It's very sad. So, but it's a very interesting subject. If you people out there have had any paranormal experiences at the Capitol, if you work there, something.
So I think it's interesting to note that they are pursuing a new prison. They're building a new prison in Arkansas. There are several in the state of Arkansas. The one that we hear the most about is Tucker Max, which is in Tucker, Arkansas. But there is also Cummings, and where is Cummings? It's in Gould, Arkansas. Or Cummins. It's not Cummings. It's Cummins Unit. Yes. But there are several in the state of Arkansas. But they are building a new one. And the new one, I think they have already bought the land, and that construction, I think, is set to start pretty soon. Yeah. It's in Charleston. Yeah.
I don't know where that is.
That's in, the northern part, I think, of the state. So, yeah. And, it says Sarah Huckabee Sanders' office said an 815-acre property was purchased in Charleston, and they purchased it for $2.9 million, and, they've been searching for the land for a while. And so there are some people that are a little concerned about the prison being built in that area. So, we'll just see how all that kind of works out. So it's always interesting to see the politics behind that. So, yeah.
Yeah, which in 2 days is what do they call that? Super Tuesday now? I don't know. Oh,
it's election day.
It's election.
That's what they call it. They call it election day.
And it'll be interesting. We'll get to see what happens. So
yes. So whatever you vote, just vote. Just vote.
And you get a little sticker.
That's why I go.
There you go.
Yes. All right. Thank you guys very much, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, and follow us on all the stuff. Facebook, Instagram. I'm looking at maybe doing some TikTok, so stay tuned. And then, of course...
Oh, Lord.
I know. And reach out to us on unexplainedarkansas@gmail.com. Love you guys.
Bye.